Welcome to the Alternative Dog Moms podcast. I'm Kimberly Gauthier, creator of Keep the Tail Wagging. I've been blogging about raw feeding, pet wellness, and life as a crazy dog mom for more than 10 years. I've seen massive improvements in my dog's health since I began raising my dogs naturally, and I'm passionate about sharing my experience to help other pet parents.
I'm Erin Scott from the Believe in Dog podcast. For more than 10 years, I've been researching and learning everything I can about healing cancer, allergies, autoimmune, and mystery illnesses in both my dogs and myself. And I can't wait to share with you everything I've learned in case it could help you too. As the Alternative Dog Moms, Kimberly and I are bringing you all the latest dog health news that we're following and the brilliant people we're meeting along the way. Now let's get started. Hello, Kimberly.
Hello, Erin.
So I'm very excited about our guest today. We have so many questions for her. Do you want to introduce her?
I do. It's Dr. Susan Recker. So we all know Dr. Recker because her face is in Dr. Karen Becker's profile picture, her personal profile. So it's like I've known this face much longer than I've known the woman. And I know her now because she works with Animal Diet Formulator, and I got to meet her IRL at the Feed Real Institute, and I tried to steal her from Dr. Karen Becker, but man, that woman is holding on to her best friend like nobody's business. And I've heard the story of how you guys met in college. And I love your friendship. I love that you guys have this holistic world in common. And what I would love to know is, one, when you started your journey into veterinary medicine, did you start wanting to go the traditional route? Like, at what point in time did you pivot to holistic? So I guess, basically we want to know, what's your origin story? What brought you to veterinary medicine?
Okay, good question. So I kind of landed in vet school almost accidentally. I am not the typical veterinarian who, most of us say, I knew since the time I was 3 that I was going to be a veterinarian. And yeah, that was not me. I didn't know what I was going to do. In fact, when I was young, I thought for sure I was going to be a lawyer. Don't ask me why. I have no idea why. I also thought my name should have been Nancy for some inexplicable reason. So we're just going to disregard all of those childhood dreams as, fever dreams or something. I don't know what they were. But I started in undergrad and went through a few different majors before I settled on vet med. I just kind of was finding my way and feeling around for what resonated with me. And I had the good fortune of going to Iowa State University for undergrad. I'm from Iowa. And my advisor said to me one day, he was like, well, hey, listen, what about vet med? We have a really great vet med school here. And I said, all right, let me check that out. So I took some animal science classes and I really enjoyed it and applied for vet school and was accepted, and then started my vet school journey. So yes, Karen Becker and I met on the day of vet school orientation. Neither of us knew anybody there, and we just happened to sit next to each other. And she was like, hey, do you know anybody here? And I was like, hey, no, I don't. Do you? And she said, no. And then we just were like, magnetically connected from that point on, and enjoyed our vet school time together. And after graduation, we were still in contact, but not as frequently because we were both starting our careers. Karen was opening her practice. I was having children. We were very busy, but we would meet up a couple of times a year. And then later in our lives, we are both in places that we're able to spend more time together professionally and have some collaborations, which is really fun. But I did not go down the more integrative, holistic path right away. I didn't have a lot of exposure to that. Dr. Becker did have more exposure to that early in her life, and mine didn't come until later. So I went directly into a very busy, very conventional practice after vet school. And I practiced that way for about, probably a decade. And then I started to become increasingly frustrated with my patients not responding to the accepted treatments the way I was told they would. And I kind of started to feel like I was being, like somebody was putting one over on me. Like, okay, guys, this is not funny. This isn't going the way I think it should. This isn't going the way you told me it would. What's going on? And this is going to sound totally ridiculous, but it's true. I had the epiphany at that time. I was like, you know what? Maybe I'll listen to the pet owners and see what they are experiencing and seeing with their own pets. Because we were kind of taught in vet school, like, you're the doctor, you know what's going on, you're the expert. And unfortunately, they kind of indoctrinated us with that attitude. And it was when I said to myself, maybe that's not actually the best way to do this, and started listening to my clients. And some of my clients were coming to me with interest in integrative things. And so then I said, well, let me check some of these things out. Maybe there's something to this. And my own first foray into that world was in chiropractic. I took the chiropractic certification course for animals. It was in Wisconsin, so you can't call it chiropractic there. It's veterinary spinal manipulation therapy, but it's chiropractic. Um, and part of that, if you've ever seen a human chiropractor, you know that most of them are very focused on nutrition. So chiropractic and nutrition typically are very closely connected. And so that was kind of my introduction to nutrition as well. And at the same time, I had young kids and I was very interested in nutrition for them as well as for myself. So that was another thing that seems totally obvious, but was not. Like there was a light bulb moment. Oh, if I want my children to eat less processed food, if I want my children to eat things that are biologically appropriate, not tons of sugar or whatever else, maybe it would make sense if my patients were eating what's more closely aligned with their physiology as well. So I became more interested in those things. But then my career took a bit of a detour, and I was the program director and lead instructor for a veterinary technician program for about 7 years. So that was my primary focus. But I was able to bring some of that alternative, holistic, integrative approach into the program, which I was really thankful for, because veterinary technicians can play a huge role in advocating for patients in the veterinary practice. And then after I transitioned away from that, I was very lucky to be literal next door neighbors with Steve Brown. And if you know who Steve Brown is, he's known as the godfather of raw because he actually created that segment of pet food. He was the very first person to create the first commercially available complete and balanced raw pet food. So he was my neighbor. I would toddle on over to Steve's house and sit next to him, and he would show me his big, scary Excel spreadsheet formulator. And I would be totally overwhelmed. But he had sold his formulation program to the current owners of ADF a few years before that. So I learned from him on his scary spreadsheet, but I also had access to ADF at the same time. And so I was able to learn his methods, but then use the much more user-friendly, for me anyway, ADF software as we know it today. So that's how I came to be here.
So it was just total dumb luck that you ended up his neighbor?
Well, yeah, I mean, so Steve and Dr. Becker are really good friends too. So we did kind of engineer things a little bit, to try to make sure that we all lived in this like kind of family commune situation, which was super cool.
That's so wonderful.
I know.
I never got to meet Steve Brown because he formulated for Darwin's here. And I always missed him because when I fed for years, I fed Darwin's. That's how I transitioned my dogs to raw, was with Darwin's. It's funny because I was introduced to raw. I had a sick dog like everyone else who has that same story. It's like I had a sick dog. Nothing else was working. I heard about fresh food. So I did not know that Darwin's existed. I didn't know anything. So I just Googled it and found a website that was selling fresh food. It wasn't in this state. So to ship it was going to be as much as the food was. And I was just like, who can afford this? It never occurred to me to try and make it myself. But I don't know, somehow I came across Darwin's. And I still remember the day standing on a train platform, talking into the phone, apologizing profusely by the noise, and getting set up with my first order. And 2 weeks later, my dog was, basically practically healed just from eating a partial raw diet. And I've been an advocate ever since because it was astounding. But every single time he was in town or anything, I had a friend who used to work there, and she would always be telling, "Oh, you just missed Steve Brown." And I'm just like, you know my number. You know I will leave work.
So I have to ask, do you have dogs now, and what do you feed them?
I do. I have one dog and two cats right now at this particular stage of my life. And my dog's name is Alice. She's an English cream golden retriever. And I do feed Alice raw food, both a mix of commercial raw food as well as homemade raw food. Since I use ADF all the time and I fairly quite quickly became proficient in formulation. I oftentimes will go to my freezer and my pantry and be like, well, what do I have? And then I formulate a diet for her based on what I've got right there. So her diet changes very frequently just based on what I have in my kitchen.
So, one of the topics we often hear is like, do we need to balance every single meal, or is it okay to kind of balance over time, maybe throughout the week? Because as people, we're not balancing and calculating this out for ourselves all the time. So, with what you do you have thoughts on that?
I do. I do have a few thoughts. The first thing, I totally understand that question about, well, we don't do it for ourselves. Why should we do it for our dogs? The difference, there are a couple of differences. One is that dogs live much shorter lives than we do. And so everything that happens in their lives is compressed and the timeline is sped up, right? So those nutritional deficiencies are going to manifest much more quickly in that shorter lived animal than they would in us. But carrying that further, look at us. Look at the state of our health. You know, most of us do have chronic diseases by the time we're in middle or older age. And so I don't think we can hold the typical American human diet up as a model to follow for our pets who are dependent on us to make these decisions for us. But given whether we balance over time or in each meal kind of depends on the circumstances, I think. The first thing to consider is we don't really know what the timeline is for nutrient needs for some of these nutrients. Like, we don't know how long is it okay to be zinc deficient if you make sure you make it up later. We don't know that. So I can't give an answer for, yeah, just make sure you balance it out through the week or through the month or through the quarter, because we don't know. Some of those nutrients, particularly vitamins that are water soluble, is there enough left if your dog doesn't get enough B vitamins for a whole week? I don't know that. And so I'm very risk averse. I prefer not to take that chance for my own dog and my own cats. So you can balance over time. You have to be very intentional about that. What I see people do sometimes is they assume that if they're rotating, the virtue of rotation is accounting for any nutrient deficiencies. However, what I frequently see when I enter their diets into ADF and I look at where the holes are, each of the diets they're rotating between has the same nutrient deficiencies. So they're never making up those nutrient deficiencies.
Yeah.
So you can do it, but you actually do have to pay attention to what's in each of those diets to see if you're filling all the holes over time.
Yeah. When I signed up for AAF during the beta,
Mm.
and I was about to give up on it when it was switched. And then it was like, okay, finally I can use it. It makes sense to me. But it was eye-opening how little I really understood, not only about what my dogs needed, but how all of the foods interact with each other. So it's not as easy as, oh, this diet is deficient in blank, so I'll just add blank, because you basically switch everything around all over again. And actually, for National Raw Feeding Week, I was thinking of publishing a recipe a day. And I was just like, gosh, I don't know if I really want to do this. And someone said, oh, just have ChatGPT give you a list of recipes and then plug those into the software and fix them. And all I ended up doing was sharing an article about why I would not use ChatGPT for recipes, because they were so deficient. And even though I gave them the criteria that I needed, they weren't, horribly deficient, but they were not something that I would share with people. But it took me days just to figure out 2 recipes and get it all done. And even then, it was so convoluted. that I was just like, I'm not going to do this for an entire week. It's too much. I'm always hesitant to share recipes anyway, because I always worry about people. I don't think people really understand that recipes that you get online were made probably specifically for a dog, not your dog. And it really needs to be adjusted for what your dog needs. But it was a hot mess. Saying that, I was stunned at how many people are currently using ChatGPT to formulate recipes. I mean,
Mm.
I had never even occurred to me, but everyone else is doing it. And it's just like, no, guys.
The other thing that what you just said is completely true. The other thing that I always worry when I see recipes online is when they're not specific, I can tell you they're not balanced because it very much depends on what's the fat percentage of the meat. Is there skin involved? What cut of meat are you using?
Mhm.
And so if the recipe doesn't give those specifics, then they're leaving that up to interpretation of the user who's going to make that recipe. And some batches you make, depending on which ingredients you choose, might be balanced, but others might not be. And so the details really matter. And if you drift from the recipe, if you're like, well, beef is close enough to pork, I'll just use that
Yeah.
instead. No, it changes everything.
I see a lot of people who alternate proteins. They'll take one recipe, or they'll pay a formulator for one recipe, but then alternate the main protein in that recipe, thinking I can turn this one recipe into 5 recipes and my dog is great. And and even though they have like a rudimentary understanding that pork and beef are different, they really haven't looked into how different. And, like I said earlier, adding that beef instead of pork, how that switches everything else in the recipe.
So I'm a commercial raw girl because it makes my head want to explode to think about doing anything other than that. But I had watched the Inside Scoop videos going through all the different raw food brands, and your topic of knowing like the fat content of your meat had come up, and that blew my mind. So if you're using like the 80-20 ground beef or something versus like the 93-7, it completely changes everything, and that just blew my mind.
Yeah. And I don't think that's, obviously, if it blew your mind, it's not intuitively obvious. It's just not. But and Kimberly, you made a comment about it's not as simple as just adding something in and then you've balanced your dog's diet. The reason you can't just do that is because we also have to think about how many calories your dog is eating. Sure, if you just threw all the foods at your dog all day long, you would eventually meet all those nutrient needs, but your dog would also be a blimp because you'd have given him, 4 times the amount of calories that he needs for the day. So that's where the trickiness comes in, is we have to fit all those nutrients into the right calorie package for your dog. So the leanness of the meat matters. And it's not that you can't make a balanced diet with more fatty meat. It's just that you're probably going to have to use synthetic supplements. So sometimes people will say to me, well, I want a general purpose recipe where I can rotate proteins and use whatever's on sale, and it has to be all whole foods. No, no, we can't do that. It's just not going to work. It's very dependent on, we can make whole foods recipes, but then we're counting on the nutrients in each one of those specific ingredients to work together to fill all those holes in that specified calorie requirement. So that's why
Yeah.
it's tricky.
And Erin, I meant to say this to you a couple weeks ago when I was doing those recipes. I now understand why there's so many eggs in the Forever Dog Life recipes.
Choline,
Because
sister, it's
that
all about the choline.
Yeah, it was so funny because by the time I finally finished a recipe, and I had my 2 recipes, I had a beef one and a chicken one. I was so excited. But the number of eggs that were in that recipe because I wanted to keep the ingredients list short, and I wanted to try as I could avoid any synthetics. But yeah, my recipes would be like 6 eggs. You need to put 6 eggs in this recipe. And it was like, it was a 5-pound recipe. So maybe a couple days. I mean, it was just like, good gravy. I mean, yeah, it was not. I have a lot of respect for people who formulate meals because it's just not something I would ever want to do professionally. It's not fun.
I mean, it can be fun. It's like it's a mystery. I look at it every time as I need to solve this mystery. So it can be
Yeah.
fun, but
Well,
it's
that's what's
tricky.
so funny is I tell people I use it as like kind of my own little video game where my goal is to have a recipe of up to 10 ingredients and have it be balanced and just do different things. And I just play around with it. And I always encourage people like sign up for the 2-week free trial and play around with it and see what you can get. But it does give you a real big respect for what it takes and just it knocked out so many of my preconceived notions. Like, like that 80-10-10 is balanced. That, some people will tell you, oh, well, and I haven't heard this in years, but years ago when raw feeding was more of the wild, wild west, um, people were like, "Oh, I only feed my dog green tripe. That's a balanced meal on its own." It's like, no, it's not. No, it's really not. And just learning all of the or relearning things and learning to correct that part has been fun. But the idea of trying to produce something professionally for someone else, no, that's not fun. Not at all.
That's what I'm here for.
So I find it difficult just to figure out like how many calories a day my dog needs. And when you're looking at commercial raw brands, it's like they break it down for like it's like every brand breaks it down differently as to like how many calories are in like however much of their food is being portioned. Like, why is this so difficult?
Yeah, you're right. It is. There's no uniformity with that. And what's even trickier from my perspective as a formulator or when I'm trying to guide my consultation clients who want to use some commercial raw and some homemade or just entirely commercial raw and we're trying to figure that out, everybody calculates their calories differently. So what the package says for calories might not match up with what ADF says when I enter that food and put it in there. There might be a discrepancy because there is no universal way that calories are being calculated. So that's a first problem. A second problem, like you mentioned, is how do you figure out how many calories your dog needs? And that's going to be an average, right? Like every day is going to be different in terms of what their actual caloric needs are based on their activity for that day, their metabolism, which is tied to their overall health. If there's any sort of hormonal fluctuations, that's going to impact their metabolism. So we're talking broad generalizations. And keep in mind that if your dog is normally active but is injured and is on, bed rest for 2 weeks, calorie needs are going to decrease dramatically during that time. But if we just talk about it as an average, unfortunately, the blanket statement I'll make is your dog's not as active as you think he is. And I say that with love and with full acknowledgement that it's the same thing for my dog. So my
Yeah.
dog is 5 and I walk her every day for about an hour. Plus she, plays with not so much with the cats, but with the grown-up children that I have. And she goes outside and noses around, spends a lot of time outside. I formulate for her below the activity level of FEDIAF's less active and way below the activity level assumption that AAFCO makes. And remember, AAFCO is the body that provides the nutrient profile standard for all of our commercial pet food in this company. Or in this country. So all of our companies, the only option they have is AAFCO, which is grossly overestimating calorie needs for dogs and cats.
Yeah.
There's so many problems.
I know. It is a shocker. And I mean, I'm all for simplifying things because for instance, with my dogs, in the wintertime, they're obviously getting fewer walks, they're outside less, so they do live a very sedentary lifestyle. So I feed them less. I cut back their meals to avoid weight gain. And in the summertime, my dogs are more active, but I know that they're not working dog active.
Mhm.
I know they're not as active as they could be. And so I'm always adapting, adjusting. Plus, I have multiple dogs. So each dog is different. And so although they all eat the same meal, I adjust everyone's meals based on their individual needs. And it's something that I'm constantly reviewing just to go over. But I know that I can always be doing more.
Well, I even had a situation where my older guy went from eating raw to gently cooked, and I changed brands of foods that I was feeding him. And I was still serving him about 8 ounces each meal. That's like the package that it was like individually packaged. And I didn't realize that the gently cooked food was less calorically dense. And after about 6 months, I'm like, he's really lost weight. And I'm like, oh my God, I've been starving my dog, basically, because he really needs to get like 10 ounces at each meal. And because he's an older guy and he's a pit bull, so he's, has a bulky, he's a bulky dude. It was actually a good thing that he lost the weight, but I'm glad that like we kind of caught it when we did and were able to like start giving him more. But this was making me think of this whole situation that has become brought to all of our attention about when you're not feeding like the recommended amount, are you then causing nutrient deficiencies? And this has been fascinating to think about because it's like pet obesity is a huge problem. And like the most common thing that vets will do is like kind of like, we'll give them like 3/4 of what, and like maybe throw some green beans in there or something. It's always like green beans or something, right? And so are we causing all these nutrient deficiencies while trying to get our pets to lose weight?
Yes. Yes, we are. And and I was just as guilty of it when I was in practice. I didn't know any better, so I was one of those vets saying, "Well, just feed less because your dog's getting too many calories." I had no idea that then they weren't getting the nutrients they needed. And so there's a lot of vets out there saying that, not because they don't care, it's because they don't know. And we're just not given a thorough nutrition education in vet school, not even close. So, when you ask your vet, unless your vet has an interest in nutrition and has taken it upon themselves to educate themselves more about nutrition, if you ask for food recommendations, you might just be getting like the vet's like, well, gosh, what have I heard of? I've heard of this and this and this. You should try those, So it's not, and I'm by no means am I throwing veterinarians under the bus. I love you, my colleagues. I'm just saying I understand you don't know how to answer those questions because I was there too. And it actually takes a lot of independent study to learn about those things because we just never learned it in vet school. So the other thing, Erin, with what you're saying is sometimes, I looked at some brand recommendations and their feeding guidelines were not bad. They were not making dogs fat. Unfortunately, their food is formulated to AAFCO, which means when they're giving those proper calorie recommendations, they are recommending amounts that will cause nutrient deficiencies. And I'm not throwing them under the bus either. I don't think they know that either. Again, because all they have to work with is the AAFCO framework. And that's just not enough anymore.
So why does ADF also offer the option for FEDIAF when you're formula? Why
So
can't
it's okay. So we have a global usership. We have people from all over the world who use our software. So FEDIAF is the European counterpart to AAFCO. It's the body in Europe that does all of the pet food stuff that AAFCO does here. In my opinion, they do it a little better. They update their nutrient profiles much more frequently. And the big thing that FEDIAF does that AAFCO doesn't is they recognize an active dog profile and a less active dog profile. So if you look at them and you compare them, you'll see that the nutrient minimums are higher in the less active dog profile. That's because it's forcing us to put more nutrients into a smaller calorie package. We always formulate fresh food diets based on a caloric basis, meaning how much of each nutrient is there in every 1,000 calories of this diet. Now, that's different than how kibble is formulated. Kibble is formulated on a dry matter basis. Sometimes I see fresh food companies that have clearly used an animal nutritionist whose experience is in kibble, and they formulated a fresh food on a dry matter basis. Well, on paper, on dry matter, it looks like it meets the requirements. When you convert it to caloric basis, which you have to do for more calorically dense diets, like almost all fresh meat-based diets are, it's deficient. So there's a number of things at play there. But back to why FEDIAF. So when I'm formulating for individual animals, when I formulate for my own animals, I use the FEDIAF profiles. I prefer them because they're more up to date. I prefer them because they have less active caloric profiles. They've also established metabolic needs. What that means is I can figure out not on every 1,000 calories what is the nutrient need, but what is my actual dog's biological, physiological need for manganese, for vitamin D, for linoleic acid. What does she need to put into her body every day, regardless of how many calories she consumes? That's important too, obviously, to maintain weight. And we have to formulate on a caloric basis if we're making diets for the masses. Like if I'm going to put a recipe out there on the internet, I have to do it to a caloric basis because I can't formulate a million different versions for every dog that's out there. I have to pick a bucket. A bucket being that I'm going to assume most dogs are less active, and I'm going to formulate for that bucket. FEDIAF helps us to do that a little bit more easily than AAFCO or NRC. You can also choose to formulate to NRC and ADF.
So, okay, I want to go to the pet food store, and look at the nutritional information for my dog. So how do I tell? What is I know there's like the kcals. Like, what is it that I'm looking for to know that it's calorically calculated versus dry matter? Like, what does that look like on the box? Is there a way to tell?
Usually not, because they don't give you enough nutrient information on the package of pet food to be able to tell. The only way you'll be able to tell is if you can get a complete nutritional analysis from the company, and then you compare it to the nutrient profile standard. If they're labeled as complete and balanced according to AAFCO standards, and yet you compare it to the AAFCO caloric profile and it's deficient in a bunch of stuff, but you compare it to the AAFCO dry matter standard and it matches up, they formulated in dry matter.
Hmm.
So the unfortunate thing is just going to the pet store and looking at pet foods, you're not going to know. You're not going to know.
Yeah. And this was the whole thing we were talking about, Kimberly, right? With asking these brands for that. And I guess one of our questions was, I don't know that I'd know what to do with it if I got it.
Yeah, that I was astounded by, because I posed the question of, is this something that people should do, or are we just creating, basically more, I don't know, conflict or drama or anything? Because I was just really interested in the discussion, and I was really impressed with, because I wanted to know, what are you looking for? Like, why do you need this information? And the number of people who were like, I just think that they should be transparent. I should be able to ask and get this information. People who had dogs with specific needs, where they did need to dive deeper into the nutrient analysis. Because my thought was that with my dogs, all I really care about is the ingredients panel and the guaranteed analysis, because I have healthy dogs. So that's as far as I go. But of course, my dogs aren't representative of all dogs. And so I thought it was really interesting to learn the number of people who do benefit from that information. I was equally interested in the number of people who, were they to get it, they would have no idea what to do with it. And I felt the same way. I mean, I think I probably have a little more knowledge than the average person, but I would still need to, or would like to, work with like my veterinarian, a nutritionist, to really have a clear understanding of what that information is.
Yeah, so I can offer a couple of tips. If people are interested in really looking at their food and seeing if it's meeting their dog's needs, there are a few ways they can do that. It is going to involve some effort, maybe some math, so it might be intimidating to some folks. But if you want to do a deep dive, you can. One of the simplest things that you can do, if you can get that complete nutritional analysis from the company, and in my personal opinion, if companies are transparent, they will provide it. If they have nothing to hide, they'll give it to you.
Yeah, everyone I asked provided it with. The only thing they wanted to know is, what did I need it for? And not because of like, well, what are you doing with it? They wanted to know if there was something I needed help with my dogs.
Mm-hmm.
And when I just explained that I just wanted to understand more about their food, they're like, oh, okay. And they sent it to me. I had no problem whatsoever. And that actually was a pleasant surprise. I really appreciated that.
I am delighted to hear that. So, so if you can get that from the company, they might provide it to you in different formats. They might provide you a caloric formulation, so how many nutrients per 1,000 kcals. They might provide it to you on an as-fed basis, and then it might be presented more like, calcium is 1.2% or something like that. Iron is 88 milligrams per kilogram or something like that. So then you're going to have to do a little bit of conversions to get that into a caloric format to compare it to the caloric nutrient standard. Or they might provide it to you on a dry matter basis. If they provide it to you on a dry matter basis, that doesn't necessarily mean it was formulated on a dry matter basis. We oftentimes use that as a comparison so that we can compare apples to apples if we're looking at foods that have different moisture levels. If you break it down to dry matter basis, then you can tell what's actually in that food when there's no water left.
Mm-hmm.
So you get your complete nutritional analysis, and then if it's in the caloric format, you can Google AAFCO's caloric nutrient profile for adult dogs. Just match them up and just see if there's enough of every nutrient compared to AAFCO's requirements. But remember, AAFCO's assuming a very high activity level. So if your dog is less active and it's just barely meeting AAFCO, it's probably not going to meet your dog's nutrient needs. There's going to be deficiencies. You can take that a step further. You can download FEDIAF's nutritional guidelines for free. AAFCO doesn't put theirs out there, but like some people have put them out there so you can find them on the internet. FEDIAF just makes it available to anybody. And so you can compare against their less active profile and their active profile, and you can get a better idea if there's enough nutrients for less active dogs there. You can go further and you can drill down to the level of your own dog's specific needs. There are ways that you can calculate how many calories your dog needs, what that would look like for a caloric profile, and then match up each nutrient. Is there enough manganese in the number of calories that my dog needs? You can do that math and do that. And ADF will help you do that, but you can do it even without ADF. It just takes a lot of math. And, I'm interested in that even for dogs that don't have health problems, because I can't say that years of eating a diet that's deficient in some nutrients isn't going to cause some health problems down the road. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and back to what you said in the beginning, when you talk about, well, I don't balance my own diet, so why would I? There's so many things in my health that I wouldn't consider, detrimental. Like I'm not on medication. I don't have to go to the doctor for. And it's just, I fell down a rabbit hole one day just because of my dogs. I was curious about the whole idea of, well, okay, I don't balance my own diet. So what am I missing? Where people think, oh, well, I need more vitamin D, but it's like, what do you need along with the vitamin D so that your body can, it's just never cut and dry. Not to mention, I've learned that I have a very hard time processing synthetic nutrients in my diet. So I actually have to go for whole foods. And they're more expensive, but they work. They actually work. So I'm also anemic, but iron supplements don't work for me. And those are the type of things. And unfortunately, our dogs can't explain these things to us. And we may not know that there was a problem until, maybe end of life when they exhibiting, and we call it old age, but, they're exhibiting signs of what could have been a lifelong deficient diet, and we just don't realize it.
Yeah, so that's spot on. And the other thing that I'll piggyback onto that is, when you go to the veterinarian or when you go to the doctor yourself for that matter, and you get blood work done, that's a very broad general snapshot. If you get a CBC chemistry for yourself or for your dog, if everything's okay, that's great. That's good news. That is not an endorsement that there is 100% wildly good health. That just means that those 15, 20, 25 parameters are still okay. Yay! That's not the whole story.
Or
So
that
what are we
they're
missing?
okay for that day or that week.
Yeah.
Because I had a dog that had hemangiosarcoma. I knew something was wrong with her. And I took her to the vet so many times. The vet was like, I believe you, but we've done blood work. We've done all these exams. Nothing. It wasn't until she was basically dying that she was finally diagnosed with hemangio, and then we saw it. And it was just one of those where that's where I learned that just because you get a blood work and your vet is like, all's good, all's good that day.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. All's good for what we can see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about something like the hair tissue mineral analysis? Is that something that can help identify these types of deficiencies?
That is not an area that I have a whole lot of expertise with. I've seen a number of analyses come through for my consultation clients, and so far, I have not been able to see a direct correlation with what the results are and what that animal's clinical picture is. So, first of all, I don't know enough about it to have a fully formed, comprehensive opinion about it. But just based on my experience, it's not something that I have found super useful to date. I have concerns when I have had people come to me and say, I had this hair tissue analysis done. And for example, calcium was low. So that person counseled me to add 10 times the amount of calcium to my dog's diet. Oh goodness, no, let's not do that. Let's not do that. Some bad things are going to happen. So I, I am not closing the door that they could be useful tools in the toolbox. I am just very nervous that people might put more weight on them in over other things that might be more prudent first steps.
Well, because you have to ask yourself the question, and this is something that I had to learn over time. Is it because the diet your dog is eating is deficient in calcium, or does your dog have some type of thing going on where they're not absorbing calcium? And it's just one of those where, and I think that we live in a time, I get medical questions practically on a daily basis from strangers because, they don't have a veterinarian in their area that they feel comfortable talking to about nutritional information. They don't have access to a holistic vet. So they go to social media, and I appear to be someone who is knowledgeable, and I have to break their heart every time and say, I'm sorry, but you will need to find, and here's a list of holistic vets. You can find one that does phone consultations, but you will need to find a holistic or a veterinarian. But, we look for these answers, and people are so well intentioned when they give advice. I've been tempted to do so as well. I had a lot of experience with dogs with IBD and digestive issues. So it's easy for people to look at my experience and think that they will have the same success if they do what I do, which has caused me to dial it back on sharing. I'm very vague about my recipes. I'm very vague about how I use supplements, only because what works for my dogs, I learned through trial and error over an extent for years. And it's not something that I can say, okay, I'm going to package this and now share it with the world. And here's the answer to the forever dog. No, this is just what works for my dogs. And then there are also the things of where we live and what our life is like and, what we're exposed to. There are just so many variables that I think Dr. Lori Kosher years ago told me, because she was working with, was it, I don't remember. Erin, do you remember the name of the Parsley Pet? She was working with Parsley Pet, and she had a lot of dogs coming in with, I think, copper
Storage.
Yes, yeah, and it was because a lot of them lived in an area where there was a battery factory, and there were just all of these things that you just would never consider, and so, that really it made me slow down. I know that you would want to say, my dog is experiencing these issues, this is what I've done so far, what else can I do? If I were talking with a friend, I would work that out with a friend, but to share that on social media, I am endlessly astounded at how little I know.
Mhm.
I love it though.
So, is there blood work or other tests that can be done if we're concerned that our dog has some kind of deficiency? Like maybe we've been feeding less than the recommended amount and we're like, oh, but I don't know what they could be deficient in. Like, how is there a way to figure that out?
We can test some nutrients. So there are some blood tests that will give you, like, what's your dog's B12 level, or what's your dog's vitamin D level, things like that. So there are some nutrients we can test, but we don't have reliable ways to test for every essential nutrient to be able to make dietary manipulations to address them. So going back to what I said earlier about me being risk averse, for me, that looks like I'm just not going to feed my dog or my cats a diet that's deficient in anything and play that kind of roulette, because I don't know what's going to happen. So if I know that their diet has everything in it that's essential and in the amounts that we know are essential, then I can at least know that, sure, like Kimberly said, they could have an individual difference in how they process that. And maybe they do need more or less than the typical dog or cat. And that might be something that I won't know until there is a disease state that manifests. But I can at least know that I'm not setting them up for a deficiency or an excess if I'm cognizant of what they're eating.
And how do you respond to people who basically believe that fresh food will cure everything and somehow dogs will, if there is a deficiency, somehow they'll fix it? I don't know, by eating grass or eating soil or like, because in nature, that's what I often hear, well, wild dogs would, and they're fine. So, why would we spend so much time with our dogs?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So I think sometimes we forget that wild dogs did have some disease. Like they didn't have the same problems that our dogs today do because of lifestyle issues and toxic environment issues, similar to looking at our own health. If we look at human health 150 years ago, 200 years ago, it was a different picture. There were some problems then that now we can prevent and we're much better off for. But there are some issues they didn't have then and we do now because of the toxic environment and lifestyle that we lead. And I think the same thing is true with our dogs. I wish that we could feed dogs out of every disease. We can't. Nutrition is for sure a foundational issue, 100%. But I have a number of dogs and cats that come to me for nutritional consults with their parents just beside themselves, like, look, I've done everything I thought was right for their whole lives. And now they
Mhm.
still have IBD or cancer or pancreatitis or whatever. So it's not all nutrition. I wish it were, because then we could fix everybody and that'd be great.
Yeah.
In my ideal world, that's how it'll be. But we're not living in my ideal world. And unfortunately, all those other factors can't override, or they do override good nutrition in some cases. So that's both good and bad news. It's good news in the sense that, you know, please let yourselves off the hook if you're thinking you did something wrong, even though you've taken care of your animal to the best of your ability with all of the information you have. Either nobody knows this magical piece of information that we needed to prevent your animal's problem, or your dog has a specific situation going on that you couldn't have foreseen. So continue to do the best you can with nutrition. And maybe that is making adjustments from the really great diet you were feeding, but for whatever reason isn't right for your dog right now. So let's adjust from there. But let's not spend time beating ourselves up about how we did something wrong when, looking back, you did everything exactly right as far as we know it to be right now.
I'm laughing because I'm thinking of when I was a kid and I didn't drink milk, and my dad would be like, "You're gonna get rickets." I was like, "That's a health thing you don't hear about anymore, right?" Like that used to be a problem, and now it's
And isn't that from oranges? Like not
Yeah,
that's
eating.
scurvy.
scurvy,
Oh,
Yeah.
vitamin
scurvy.
C.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's like another thing that we never hear.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness we're not stuck on ships in the middle of the ocean with no fresh produce for months at a
Yes.
time.
So, what are like some of the more common deficiencies that you have seen in? Is it things like manganese, or are there ones that are like the most common?
So if we look at fresh food diets, yes, manganese is common, magnesium more common, sometimes potassium, vitamin D, vitamin E, iodine, choline. those are probably the most common deficiencies I see in fresh food diets. If we're looking at more processed diets, kibbles and canned foods, then unfortunately it's protein. It's like the most basic. It's
Mm.
typically not the micronutrients because most of those ultra processed foods, they're using a premix of synthetic minerals and vitamins and they just pour it in. And there's usually like a lot of most of those micronutrients in those processed foods, but maybe not enough protein.
Can someone balance a raw diet with kibble?
Um, it depends. It depends. And that would be a very case specific answer. So it depends on the raw diet. It depends on the kibble. It depends on how much you're feeding of each. It depends on the dog's activity level and caloric requirements. So my answer to that is a maybe.
Yeah. Vegetables, because I saw this come up in a I love that this comes up every year in raw feeding groups. What are the benefits of vegetables? I mean, because people still
Mhm.
don't believe, dogs are carnivores. They have no biological need for carbs, so we should not feed vegetables.
Yeah, I'm always puzzled by that. Like, have people not seen their dogs eat grass? And just, just to put it out there, they don't always eat grass because they're trying to make themselves vomit. Sometimes they eat grass because they're looking for fiber. And
My dogs love spring grass.
yeah,
So, yeah, there are certain,
yeah.
and it's not all of our grass, but there's certain, and I know where they are. There's these pucks of grass. They grow a little bit differently on our property. And my dogs go from little pocket to pocket and snack on it every day. In the
Yeah.
spring, though, only in the spring.
Many years ago, my family had a dog named Barney who was a basset hound, and he was the reason we could not grow Brussels sprouts in our garden because he ate them all. Like, no matter what stage of development the plant was in, he would eat it. And I kept the garden gated off. So I was like, this year I'm going to have Brussels sprouts. And one day somebody left the garden gate open, and nope, there was Barney laying in the garden, eating each sprout off the stalk, having the time of his life. So yeah, no, dogs do seek out plant material. Fiber is, I cannot, I cannot overstate the importance of fiber. Fiber is important for gut health, in terms of normal bowel movements, but it's also important for microbiome health. Plants contain polyphenols that we don't find in animal products. So antioxidants of various sorts that are crucial for maintaining good health are present in plants. And so I'm always puzzled by people who think plants are somehow dog diet Satan because I don't understand where that's coming from. And I am in no way advocating vegetarian diets for dogs and certainly not for cats. But I do include a healthy dose of plant material in diets that I formulate because I do think it's very important.
Oh my gosh. Well, this has been wonderful. And I need to just sit down and play around with the animal
I know. That's what I'm going to
formulator.
spend the
I would have
afternoon
so
doing.
much fun with it.
It is so much fun because it's fascinating. You walk into the Animal Diet Formulator feeling, well, for me, feeling so confident, like, I know I got it. And it's just like, no, I don't have it. I'm close, but I don't have it. And it's not easy. And what's interesting to me is it's not, as you said, not just diet. Um, because I have, when I had Rodrigo, when he was alive, he had EPI, and so he had absorption issues. So he was a completely different dog than my other dogs and had to be treated completely differently. And it gave me just a whole new respect for canine nutrition because it really isn't as cut and dry. It's not apples to apples with every dog.
Highly recommend if people do feed commercial raw that they join Inside Scoop and check out the analysis and review of the brands that you guys did because that was just so intriguing to me.
Yeah, it was surprising to me too as we did the analyses. So and again, I am not faulting these companies. Our system needs to change.
Yeah.
Yeah. But education is key. Knowledge is power. There are video tutorials that show you how to formulate using ADF. And I've also done some webinars. And I think the first one is available to anyone, even if you don't have an ADF subscription, so that you can watch the formulator in action and get some tips and tricks.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I'll make sure we have links to all that in the show notes for everyone. And thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun to talk with you guys.
Thank you.